Mary Mac Games and Comics. Check them out on Facebook and visit their site at merrymacgames.com.
What's up, YouTube? Evan from Epic Duel Time here. This is going to be another know the rule before you duel video. I want to just kind of get down to the topic as soon as possible because it's going to be a rather long video. There's no way for me really to avoid it. I've tried avoiding it, but there's no way to explain this concept is in an easy way, so I'm just going to do it in a thorough way. In the last video for this segment, I asked you guys for a little help on some topics that you guys are really interested in because I mean, I can sit here and talk about rulings for cards all day, but if there's concepts you really want me to talk about, I think that that's more important. I'm a registered Konami judge. I have a lot of resources to be able to know this stuff. I know this stuff inside and out, and this is just these concepts are tricky, and even to this day, I think many of these are tricky. So there's no fault in asking for help. The only thing is if you don't know and you won't ask for help. So always feel free to ask these questions, because if you don't ask, you're never going to know. And one of the things that a lot of people struggle with, and an overwhelming amount of people responded to that last video with saying that we needed to have a video about this, was missing the timing. There are other resources out there. Maybe some of you don't have access to that. I don't know. But you'll have access if you're watching this video. Missing the timing is a term used, and very often improperly, but it is essentially in a nutshell, a term used for an effect that would try to activate during resolving effects, and that effect is not able to activate because of the nature of the effect, therefore it won't happen. That's going to be very clear by the end of this video. That was just a really long-worded way of saying what this is. But you're going to understand by the end of this video what missing the timing is, and what the timing is, and what you're missing. Because it's weird, and it sounds more complicated than it is. But there are steps, and you have to break down all the steps to really get a good idea of this. Everything in this game, when it comes to spell speeds and how we build the foundation of this, comes down to really chains. Our core interactions are chains. Past the fact that we summon monsters and we attack with them, we play spells, we counter the spells, we counter the counter, we play traps, we use monster effects. Those are all spell speeds. All of them. Monster effects have a spell speed. Spells, traps, anything that activates has some sort of spell speed. And that's all just the nature of how they are, and that's how you form chains. So we have chains, and when two effects are either activating one after the other or at the same time sometimes, we build a chain. And it's essentially the order by which we're going to have these effects activate, and then the order by which they're going to resolve. Well, when we activate things, they're going to end up resolving backwards. You go up, and then you come down. You cannot interrupt chain for any reason whatsoever. Now, effects can trigger during a chain, they just can't activate during a chain. So if a trigger is met, it won't actually do anything in-game until its activation time. And that's where we're going to run into this whole missing the timing concept, and what misses timing and what does not. And an entire chain must resolve before a new chain is formed. That's going to be very clear at the end of this video as well. The analogy I like to give, some people use ladders, some people use food, because in a certain way there's a way you can refer to that. I use stairs. Stairs are a really tangible, easy way of understanding this concept. Chain links are like stairs. If I have 5 to 6 chain links, I go up 5 to 6 stairs. If I were to come back down those stairs, I wouldn't start on stair 1 again. I would start on stair 6 again. I would start the way on the last one that I got off of. So if I went up 6 stairs, I'm going to come down 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that's how a chain works. So I want to give you an example of this. Let's say we have a game here, and I have a face down card and my opponent has a face down card. I'm going to normal summon my tour guide from the underworld, and I'm going to activate her monster effect to special summon a level 3 fiend monster from my deck, and that's going to be the chain link 1. That is her trigger effect for when she's normal summoned. She's met her trigger. When this card is summoned, normal summoned, you can activate her effect. So we're going to activate her effect, and that's going to be the chain link 1. My opponent is going to chain to that. He doesn't want me to have my effect, so he's going to chain his Fiendish Chain as the chain link 2, targeting my tour guide from the underworld to try to negate her effect, to which I have a chain link 3, Mystical Space Typhoon, and I'm going to try to destroy the Fiendish Chain. Fiendish Chain, to be able to negate, needs to be face up on the field at resolution. So, because we know that Mystical Space Typhoon does not negate anything, it just destroys things. So I'm going to try to destroy that Fiendish Chain so that it can't resolve properly, and that's what we're going to try to do. So, we have our chain built here, and now we resolve backwards. So what was the last thing that happened? Mystical Space Typhoon. So we're going to resolve it, and that's going to destroy the Fiendish Chain. However, this doesn't remove Fiendish Chain's effect from this lineup. So this chain it doesn't lose anything. Those spaces are still held. Even if I negated the card's activation, its space would still be held. It would just not resolve at all. But in this case, because a continuous trap was sent to the graveyard during the chain, before it could resolve, it resolves with what we call resolve without effect. So it just disappears. You'll hear some players use the word fizzle. I would recommend not using that term. While it gives you a bit more of a mental image of what this kind of concept applies to, it's not exactly proper, and therefore if you're communicating like a judge or something, you're going to have a much harder time understanding it. The better way is calling it resolve without effect, because that's standard what Konami has used this and labeled this term as. And then we have the resolution of our first chain link. Now on the resolution, our final chain link to resolve is Tour Guide's effect. And we'll summon a Sangan because, well, I'm not in a real duel, so I try to find as many excuses to put Sangan in videos. Chains cannot be interrupted, and it must resolve before a new chain. So we're going to repeat these 2 points because these are important points. And we're going to talk about where they come in this next piece. So, this is how we miss the timing. I'm going to show you an example of missing the timing. I have a Dark Flare Dragon in my grave, and I have other monsters in my grave too, we'll assume. I have a face-down Spell or Trap, and my opponent has 2 face-down Spells or Traps. And I'm going to banish a light and a dark monster from my graveyard, and I'm going to special summon my Light Pulsar Dragon, and his summon will be successful. But my opponent's going to respond to his summon with Fiendish Chain to hold him in place and keep him from attacking. There's also a reason you do this. So that's going to act as the chain link 1. I'm going to, again, like I did with Tour Guide, chain my MST as the chain link 2. And at this point, he's going to chain Torrential Tribute. Remember, this is a legal play because we are still responding to Light Pulsar's summoning. Remember, if this chain were to resolve and we opened a new chain, Torrential wouldn't apply. But Torrential can be chained not directly to the summon, because what you're going on here is you're saying, I want to negate his effect, oh, I'm going to destroy that, okay, well, I'll just kill him, because we're still responding to the summon. Torrential is still a legal card to activate in this scenario. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to resolve things. Torrential's going to resolve, destroying my monster. Now, we have a problem. Light Pulsar has an effect for when he is sent to the graveyard. His effect says, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one level 5 or higher Dark Dragon type monster in your graveyard. Special summon that target. And I have one. I have Dark Flare Dragon. But I have a problem. Light Pulsar Dragon was sent to the graveyard, and we haven't finished our chain yet. And he has an effect. Effects do not interrupt chains. We cannot interrupt this chain. And because it says when this card, and you can, this is an optional effect. So what happens is we don't even activate it. So my Mystical Space Typhoon is going to resolve, destroying the Fiendish Chain, and Fiendish Chain is going to resolve with that effect. Light Pulsar does not start a new chain. It does not happen at all. Because when this card activates, it has to be able to activate as the last thing that happens in the chain. So if I just special summoned Light Pulsar and he responded with Torrential, I'd get the effect, because the last thing to happen in our chain is my monster being destroyed. Remember that a summon does not start a chain. Tour Guide's effect started the first chain. This simply does not start a chain. So the first chain link would have been the Torrential, which would have destroyed him. I'm going to show you an example of that same chain with a different monster and why it'll get its effect. Let's say we have the same field, and this time I'm just going to normal summon Zangan, and we're going to repeat the same chain links, but this time we're going to need Torrential. Now, this is actually going to end differently than Light Pulsar did, and while Zangan doesn't have a summoning effect, it does have an effect for when it hits the graveyard, just like Light Pulsar does. So, Torrential is going to resolve as the chain link 3, destroying my Zangan. My MST is going to resolve, destroying the Fiendish Chain, and Fiendish Chain is going to resolve without effect. And then, on a new chain link, we are going to activate Zangan. Why do we get to activate Zangan and not Light Pulsar? Well, we can read Zangan's text. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, add one monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand. It didn't say I can add one, it said add one. That's called a mandatory effect. I don't have a choice, and if I don't have any targets, I actually have to be able to prove I don't have targets. I have to do what Zangan says. I don't get a choice. I can't not use Zangan's effect. It is a mandatory game state. I have to do it. Where Light Pulsar was optional, I didn't have to do it, and because I don't have to do it, the game doesn't require me to actually honor his effect if he's going to miss the timing. Zangan is not allowed to miss the timing because he's a mandatory effect, even though his effect says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard. So let's look at these cards, because we've got these issues. When this card is sent implies that as soon as this card is sent, not if this card, but when this card, and there are two different texts. Some cards will say if this, and some will say when this, and they do mean different things. They are not the same. When this card means at the moment of this card. So if we replace it with at the moment this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, add one monster. At the moment this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, target one level 5 or higher dragon type monster. Do you see how by changing the text we have a better understanding of when these monsters were supposed to activate and why one does not? One does, Zangan, because it's mandatory. He doesn't have a choice in the matter. Light Pulsar, however, it's optional. And so if he happens to miss his timing, tough cookies. But Zangan, if he can't miss his timing, he's not allowed to miss his timing. You have to use his effect if he goes to the graveyard. You don't have a choice. So you can't, it's not optional. Even if you don't have a monster, you still have to prove that you don't have that monster first. You have to look and see if you have a legal target for it. And I've highlighted the text down here. You can see on the second line, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard. And then you see that colon. That colon implies that that's its activation requirement. That's what requires it to activate. Right there. That's the trigger. So when it activates is when it was sent from the field to the graveyard. That's the activation. The same thing applies to Zangan. Again, the only difference is one was mandatory and one was not. So we have when this card optional versus when this card mandatory. When this card ... you can versus when this card ... and then it'll just tell you to do the effect. So I've been saying when this card do. Now I want to go over another example of mandatory versus optional. So we're going to see Dandelion on the left and Peyton the Dark Clown on the right. Dandelion on the left says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, special summon 2 fluff tokens. You have to summon them whether or not you want the fluff tokens. Now, if you can't summon 2 and you can only summon 1, you don't get any. Because it doesn't say special summon up to 2. But you have to special summon 2, so it's all or nothing. In this case, we're seeing Dandelion as a mandatory effect. You don't have a choice in how he works. You have to have the fluff tokens if he's ever sent to the graveyard. Peyton the Dark Clown. When this card is sent to your graveyard, you can remove from play this card from the graveyard to special summon 1 Peyton the Dark Clown from the hand or deck. When this card is sent from the graveyard, you can. And that's the real highlighted text right there. And that's an optional effect. Now, it's not just chain links that can actually make something miss timing. A summon can make something miss timing. Remember, it just has to be when something's trying to activate while something else is trying to finish happening. So let's say I have a Pet in the Dark Clown, and I tribute summon it use it as sacrifice for a Jinzo. Can I use Peyton's effect? The answer is no. Remember that Peyton is a when this and you can. So Jinzo here is being summoned. So what is the last thing to happen? Is Peyton the Dark Clown going to the graveyard the last thing to happen? Actually, that's not the case. Jinzo's summon was the last thing to happen. Peyton went to the graveyard as a result of Jinzo's summon. So there's no chain links in this at all. And that's the hard part. This is where missing the timing becomes difficult, because Jinzo's summon isn't a chain. He has a continuous effect, and that starts no chain links. He has no activation. Summoning him is not starting a chain. So it's not like he's interrupting anything. What he is stopping is Peyton's effect because he's being summoned. The same thing applies to a Synchro summon, a Fusion summon, or an Xyz summon. Even though Xyz makes materials, but it could be used in the terms of equip cards and stuff. Now, a very popular example of missing the timing that made a card called Soul Taker very, very popular was the monster card Elemental Hero the Shining. Elemental Hero the Shining, when he's sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target 2 banished Elemental Hero monsters and add them to your hand. When this card, you can. So my opponent activates Soul Taker, and that's just going to start our chain at 1. It's only going to be a chain link 1. However, why does this card make Elemental Hero the Shining miss timing? Let's read it. This is its most modern text. Target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. We have a semicolon. That means that's what happens when it activates. So that's its activation requirement. Some people mistake that as cost. A cost is part of an activation requirement, but what happens at activation is before the semicolon. Target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. We would target the Elemental Hero the Shining. Destroy that target, comma, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. The then in this case, comma and then implies that one part of this effect will happen and then the next part, not and the next part, then the next part. They actually are sequential rather than simultaneous. So gaining the 1,000 and destroying the monster do not happen at the same time. Destroying the monster, and then, after you're done destroying the monster, gain the 1,000. And because Elemental Hero the Shining is a when this card is sent, you can, he's going to miss the timing. Because he's being destroyed, but that's not the last thing to happen. The last thing that's going to happen in Soul Taker's resolution is your opponent gaining 1,000 life points, and that's what forces Elemental Hero the Shining, or Light Pulsar Dragon, or Peyton the Dark Clown to miss timing. So we're going to give one more example of this. My opponent has a set card, and I'm going to activate a Gear Town. Gear Town's a field spell card that has an interesting effect. I want to prove that missing the timing is not unique to monsters. It happens with spells and traps too, just less often, and generally it involves special summoning a monster, or activating effect when it's sent to the graveyard, or as some sort of condition. Remember that when you play a spell card of any kind, it has a spell speed. In this case, Gear Town's going to activate, and it's going to start a chain. Unlike a monster summon, Gear Town does start a chain, so it's going to start at chain link 1. Gear Town has an effect of letting you tribute summon ancient gear monsters. The one we're going to look at is when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 ancient gear monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Generally, this card's used alongside ancient gear Gilitron, and you get like a 3,000 point monster when it gets destroyed. Any player who knows this card knows why you don't play it face up. So, when you play it face up, Gear Town's going to activate. And that's chain link 1. If my opponent were to then chain MST at chain link 2, we're going to have a bit of a problem with our Gear Town. It's going to destroy, when it resolves, Gear Town. And then Gear Town's going to try to activate. And we have a problem, is that we still have to resolve without effect, but we still have to resolve Gear Town. That's why in the scenario where I showed you guys the Fiendish Chain, I picked Fiendish Chain on purpose, so you guys would be able to see a card resolve without effect because of Mystical Space Typhoon. Mystical Space Typhoon's pretty good at making things miss timing if you time it right. No pun intended. So, because of its own activation, Gear Town prevents itself from its effect. A lot of players who use this actually set the Gear Town in the field spell card zone. You're allowed to do that. And then what you can do is you can take another Gear Town and set it on top of it. And it would destroy by game mechanics the first copy. And because it destroyed it face down, you're not actually starting a chain of any kind over the Gear Town's effect. Now, we've talked about when this card, but then I mentioned we have if this card. There's a difference in text. These are effects that do not miss timing ever. They never miss timing. A lot of times they're mandatory. However, some of them are optional. Even though some of them are optional, they still cannot miss timing because it's saying under the circumstances rather than at the moment. Remember that when we talked about when this card affects, we replaced the words when this card with at the moment, at the very moment. And we're going to do that again. I've got a couple examples. Redox, Dragon Ruler of Boulders, and Eclipse Wyvern. For the sake of it, we're not going to use Redox's text. He's a lot of text. We're going to use Eclipse Wyvern. Eclipse Wyvern says, if this card is sent to the graveyard, banish one level 7 or higher light or dark dragon type monster from your deck. And that's a mandatory effect. Redox, Dragon Ruler of Boulders says, if this card is banished, you can add one earth dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. You can. And that's optional. I want to actually repeat both of those phrases with what we're going to replace this with. If this card really means in the circumstance of. So in the circumstance of this card being sent to the graveyard, banish one level 7 or higher light or dark dragon type monster. In the circumstance that this card is banished, you can add one earth dragon type monster from your deck to your hand. Why that is not the same as at the moment of is because there's no sense of urgency to it. It's in the circumstance that this should happen, we're going to do this next. Rather than at the very second that this happened, this needs to happen. So these effects do not have to be the last thing in a chain to happen. So Redox being banished, he can be banished as cost for something else without missing the timing. And that's what we do. So if I have a face-up Redox Dragon Ruler of Boulders, or if it's in my hand, I can activate the Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, which says banish a level 7 monster from your hand or face-up from your side of the field, draw 2 cards. And that's cost. Generally, something would miss timing off of that if Redox weren't like that. Redox's effect allows him to never miss the timing on these things. So what happens is he'll be banished, and on a new chain, after the resolution of the sword, I'll draw 2 cards. We're going to activate Redox's effect, and Redox is going to let us search out an Earth Dragon monster. I mean, you could search out a Pebbles, but you'd be playing traditional. Now, people confuse a term called Seagawk with missing the timing. Seagawk is actually an acronym for Simultaneous Effects Go On Chain, or Go On the Chain. It's essentially the idea that when a bunch of things happen all at once and would trigger all at once, you're just going to sort them out and line them up. Nothing is going to miss timing. Remember that missing the timing only applies when you're trying to resolve an effect and activate a new one at the same time, not when you're trying to activate a bunch of things at the same time. So, we're going to get a really situational board going. My opponent has a face down card, and I have 3 copies of Dark Flare Dragon in my graveyard. And we're going to say that I had a bunch of light and darks in my graveyard. I wasn't editing all this, but I go ahead and I summon 3 light Pulsar Dragons. We'll say that I met their conditions for summoning. And then as a response to the last summon, my opponent is going to respond with Torrential Tribute and try to destroy all 3 of my dragons. Now, do I get 1 effect, 2 effects, or 3 effects? In fact, I'm going to get all 3, because what's going to happen is each one of them is going to try to activate, and we're going to sort them on a chain. So once we've resolved the Torrential Tribute, I'm going to activate my first Light Pulsar, my second Light Pulsar, and my third Light Pulsar. Now, when I resolve the third Light Pulsar, I'm going to get a Dark Flare. The second Light Pulsar, I get another Dark Flare. And my third and final light pulsar, the first one that activated in the chain, I'm going to get my third dark flare from the graveyard. So I'll have 3 dark flares to replace the 3 light pulsars that all died. There are 4 forms of timing. If this card, do this. If this card, you can do this. When this card, do this. When this card, you can do this. The 3 texts in blue never miss timing. The only thing that misses timing is the red. When this card, you can do this. So, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can. It is the only time that ever misses timing. If anything that starts with if this card, or is a mandatory form of when this card, cannot, will not miss timing. This is the best way I can explain it to you guys. There's no other way. Just remember, it has nothing to do with activations. It has to do with resolving effects and trying to start a new chain in the middle of an old chain. Always finish your chains and always break things down. If you have to, assign numbers when you're in your game and you go, okay, this is chain link 1, that's chain link 2, that's chain link 3, do it, because you're never going to get confused if you're sorting through numbers and you're counting to 3 and 4 and 5 and you're counting backwards to resolve your chains. Remember, chains resolve backwards, always finish the chain, and never interrupt the chain. And the only things that miss timing are when this card, you can do this. That's it. I promise. If you guys just study this, know it, and practice it, missing the timing becomes really, really, really simple. And that's it. That's missing the timing. That's that big scary concept that nobody seems to get, and everybody on Dueling Network fucks up. So, I really hope this is a resource for you guys that can help you in your future games. And if anybody sent you this video, don't take it as that you didn't know. Most people I've found don't fully understand the concept of missing the timing. I was a judge for 2 years at locals, and I can tell you it was one of the most complicated things people did not understand in this game. It probably has to do with one of the reasons why I retired. It's an exhausting concept, and I'm glad to have been able to have the opportunity to present all this information to you guys in this kind of a forum, because I want you guys to be able to use this and help others learn the concept, because the more educated of a player you are, the better of a player you are. That's a fact. So please, if you guys have any more suggestions for future Know the Rule Before You Duel videos, go ahead and just comment them down below. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and keep dueling, America.